Hello and welcome to Their Lives, a new and special podcast hosted by me, Benji Hire, and Benji Fisher, shining a light on the lives and experiences of those who have made a positive difference in society or with incredible journeys that we want to share with all of you. Amid this coronavirus crisis, we wanted to provide an opportunity to hear those stories, which would have otherwise been kept secret with everyone in isolation. Whilst the interviews take place not in person, we hope to strike a connection with each individual and get to know more about their amazing lives.
Over the next few weeks and months, social distancing is going to become ever more prevalent in our society, and those who are vulnerable, those who are elderly in our society, will begin a long period of isolation, and loneliness will grow. As we change our way of lives and our way of living, we must shift our focus towards not only protecting the physical health of our seniors, but their mental well-being too. And with this in mind, we've been thinking about how we can play our part. And we are going to start publishing this short podcast series, Their Lives. And in this podcast, we will listen to and speak with some of our seniors in society about their stories over the years and the amazing lessons, the amazing teachings that we can teach some of our younger generations in this uncertain times. We hope that this will be not only a valuable experience for our listeners, the younger generations, but also the individuals we speak to as well, allowing them to reminisce and potentially older audiences to collectively reminisce in past times.
We started by asking David Berglas just a little bit about his background, where he was born, how he grew up. Take a listen.
Right. Well, I was born into a multinational family, and my four grandparents came from four different countries, one of which was Russia, one which was Poland, there was Lithuania involved, and Austria, and a small country that doesn't exist anymore in between. So it was very mixed, but they all had to escape from the pogroms in Russia and Poland and settled in first in Austria, then Germany. And from absolutely nothing, built up a huge textile business. In fact, it became probably the largest of its kind in Europe. There were four brothers and two sisters, and it just so happened that they each had a different quality in their personality, which made a tremendous group that you couldn't find if you were looking for them. It was wonderful. They literally started with nothing and finished up with this huge business. And we had a very, very shielded and nice early life. But then, of course, Hitler came to power in 1933. And it made it very difficult for many people, including us. And so we managed to escape to Holland, where we stayed about 9 months. And everybody said, well, it's only a small group of people, I shouldn't worry about it. And we believed them and foolishly went back and lived in Berlin. And then things got much worse, of course. And so we escaped again in 1938, which was rather late. My mother took my younger sister to Holland again. My older sister went to a school in Switzerland. My father was chasing around trying to help many other people and put me on a train by myself in Berlin with, I think I had a label with my name on it and a porter to look after me, but I had to travel by myself from Berlin to London. And that was quite a complicated route because you go from Berlin to Paris on the train, and then you have to change train stations, which I don't remember exactly how I did, but I'm sure the porter looked after me. Then you go from Gare du Lyon to Gare du Nord in Paris to Calais by train, and then a ferry from Calais to Dover, and a train from Dover to Victoria. And at Victoria, a business friend of my father's picked me up. So that was my escape, and I was 11 3/4 at the time, and didn't speak a word of English. And this man then took me to a co-educational boarding school in Surrey called Frensham Heights, and very lucky they had quite a few other refugees, so the fact that I couldn't speak English fitted in quite well because the teachers were very tolerant, and became a very famous school for that. And I stayed there for 4 years, from 1938 to 1942.
I mean, to me, it sounds like an extraordinary upbringing. What you said about it being a sheltered and nice life effectively turned upside down, as was the case for so many people in the war. And what it meant for you is trying to gain independence at an extremely young age. People now, I mean, they just don't live through the same sort of things.
No, of course. It was once in a lifetime. I mean, things like that are just indescribable. And I actually had some very interesting experiences because I saw Germany from about 5 different points of view. First of all, we lived there in the midst of things and saw when all the trouble started. Then I attended the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. And when war broke out in 1939, they thought there would never be another Olympics. But of course, 4 years later, there was an Olympic Games in London in 1948, which I also attended. So it's rather unusual that I attended the last Olympics before the war and the first one after the war. And of course, I had various interests at the time. So I was never short of things to do. But I did have a sheltered life because my father tried to shield us from all the horrible things that were going on. But obviously we could see that. And at one time I had to leave the school I was at. There were 3 Jewish boys in a class of about 40, and I was one of them. And we all had to disperse. And unfortunately, my best friend actually got killed by the Hitler Youth on a tram that was taking us to another school. So we had quite an adventurous time. But then I tried to get into the Royal Air Force, and they found out that I'd put my age up and said, because you had done that, you won't be allowed to fly. And the whole point was that I wanted to fly Spitfires because my brother-in-law was a Spitfire pilot, and that was a big disappointment. And then I found out that I could join the American Army. It sounds strange, but I joined the American Army at the end of the war, just before the war finished, and went back to Germany to stay a year and a half to do what they called censorship. Everything that was printed and everything that's recorded had to be censored very strictly because there were a lot of Nazis around still. And so that showed me Germany from a different point of view. And then once I went into show business a few years later, I went back to entertain the American forces on their camps. And many years later, I went over to Germany a few times to lecture and to demonstrate to other magicians and magic conventions and so on. So I've seen Germany from literally 5 or 6 different points of view.
And you almost went full circle, starting in the army and then ultimately performing to them. How did you make that transition? How did you go from turbulent war days into show business? Was it that chutzpah and determination that got you into the American Army, which ultimately helped with that as well?
Yes, well, when I left the American Army in 1947 rather, I went to Bradford in Yorkshire to learn textiles at the Bradford Technical College because that was my family business. And it was such a contrast from being in the American Army and seeing a lot of exciting things and horrible things. We saw the aftermath of the Holocaust and so on. So I found it very difficult sitting behind a bench in a college again. And so I was distracted by lots of things. And I was trying to organize what they call a rag day. That's where students collect money for charity. And I looked for some costumes, and a little shop that's where you could rent costumes also sold magic. And I got friendly with the man behind the counter, and that's how I literally started in magic as a hobby, which was 1947 and 48. I came back to London and went to lots of magic clubs, and it became a very absorbing hobby for about 3 years. And then, after I tried various other jobs, I was at a loose end, I was broke, and people said, why don't you do magic? And I said, well, I know a lot of tricks, but I have not an act. And they said, well, just do your tricks. Anyway, I auditioned for a nightclub, I got in, I did extremely well, and within a year, I had my own television series. I was on the radio every Sunday with millions of listeners. And in fact, to this day, I still hold the record at the BBC of receiving the most fan mail ever. I used to get between 3,000 and 4,000 postcards and letters a week because I involved the listeners with the experiment that I was doing and asked them to write in. And if they wrote in and said, well, I did so-and-so, as you instructed, that would be a statistic. But if they added, we enjoy the show or we're fascinated by what you do, it becomes fan mail. And that's why I had such a huge amount of letters, which took a lot of sorting through, but it was, in fact, I still have quite a few suitcases full of these cards and letters, which recently I've been looking through, and it's quite amazing.
And when you say that your listeners were, or the viewers were involved in experiments, what do you mean by that? How did you make sure that your fans were part of this interactive experience?
Well, what I did was I always had a large studio audience as well, and I got people to stand behind tables with objects on the table, and I asked the listeners to do the same. So maybe I would say, place 4 or 5 items on the table in front of you, like a teacup, a spoon, a pen, a lighter, and a matchbox. Mix them up in any way you like, and then turn around, and when I count to 3, turn around again and grab one. And then I would predict how many people would pick, let's say, the matchbox, right-handed people, and how many would pick up the teacup who were left-handed. And my predictions were always right. They were checked by the BBC, and the following week they announced the prediction had been correct. But I did a lot of big stunts as well. For instance, I had a box hanging over Regent Street, rather like those Christmas decorations, for a week with a big question mark on it, and sandwich board men walking up and down with an arrow pointing up what's in the box. And during my live broadcast, I would get somebody selected by the audience in a very fair way so they could see the person wasn't working with me in any way. And I would ask for some form of identity, and it so happened that that person had a passport on them. And then the passport would disappear at the studio, and when they hauled in the box in Regent Street, which had been sealed by the diplomatic corps, they checked the seals and then found the passport inside the box. So every week I did small experiments involving the listeners, as well as some of these large stunts, which I've just described.
And the large stunts must have been fascinating for people to see. But what's most intriguing is what you were referring to before. People in their own home and then trying the tricks that you are explaining to them on air. How is, I know you should never ask how a magician does their tricks, but is that sort of thing, the turning around and picking an item, is that through the influence, what you're trying to say as you go through the trick? Or is that something innate about human behavior that you know what they're going to choose?
Yes, it's not right to describe it as a trick. My background is psychotherapy. I studied psychotherapy, and that's what I really wanted to do. And in fact, I spent a year and a half in South Africa giving lecture demonstrations on hypnosis, and mostly for the medical profession. I was involved with lots of doctors and psychiatrists, and that's what I really wanted to do. And magic was just a hobby at the time. But when I came back to London, I went into various businesses which didn't work out too well at the time. So, as I said, somebody suggested, why don't you do some magic? And that just took off unbelievably right in the first year. So that was in 1952, and I continued into 1994, so well over 60 years. And I've retired since then, but I've kept myself very busy because I'm involved in advising people like Derren Brown and Dynamo, David Copperfield and David Blaine and so on. And I've written a few books for magicians and a few books on psychology and memory, and also biographical ones in Holland, where I had another long television series. So I was very lucky that I got television series in all the European countries and one in America. So I did keep myself extremely busy all those years.
And what stands out to me is how you get the participants of whatever you want to call it, a trick, an effect, how you get them to trust you, to believe you, because it's your job to persuade them that you have these incredible set of skills. And how do you go about doing that to complete and utter strangers?
It's not as complicated as it sounds. These are psychological principles. If you ask somebody to put, let's say, 4 objects on a table and turn around, and then when you count to 3, they turn around again and grab one, it is 85% sure that the right-handed person will grab the second object from the right, and the left-hand person the second object from the left. Now, that's a basic principle, and obviously with my experience, I've built up on that so I can make it much more complicated. And in fact, there's a term in magic called magician's choice, and I'm well known for that. I've lectured to magicians on this and demonstrated that you can put as many objects as you like on the table, maybe 30 or 40, and I will predict the 2 items that we'll pick from those. It's not something I can explain quickly, but I wrote a very big book called The Mind and Magic of David Berglas, which was only sold to magicians, and it's been out of print for maybe 20 years now. But I explained the principle behind it, and if there's any serious student of magic and they read that, they'll be able to understand it.
Is this a principle that is foolproof, or essentially are you working on the basis of percentages and statistical probability?
No. In my case, it's 100%. I wouldn't say foolproof, but it's 100% predictable, because I know exactly what I'm doing, how to either influence a person or how to anticipate what they're going to do. They're psychological principles rather than magical principles. And obviously, if I couldn't predict it, if there was a chance that it might go wrong, then I wouldn't be an entertainer. You don't want to see somebody performing a magic show and he predicts something and it goes wrong. So obviously, it can't go wrong if you do it correctly.
Do you never have someone that doesn't fit that is a total psychological anomaly, and those principles just don't apply to them? Or are you saying every human is the same in that regard?
Every human is the same. There are exceptions. Of course, if somebody's very drunk or mentally unstable, or maybe even too young, I'm saying too young, maybe below 4 years old, they're the only people you can't really influence, because they have to be able to listen to you and react to what you say. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there's no simple explanation. Otherwise, other magicians would be doing this as well.
I appreciate your candor nonetheless. There's part of it which is trying to influence or at least understand the psychology of others. There's also about kind of training yourself in your own mind for some incredible things that you do. I mean, lots of magicians have done similar sorts of things, but say walking on coals, hot coals, something that most people would be terrified by and would see as physically harmful. Obviously, it's physically safe, but what do you have to do in terms of your mindset to ensure that you're confident enough to do that?
Well, you mentioned one particular experiment which at one time you would only think that some Indian guru could do, walking on hot coals, red hot coals. Yes. In actual fact, it has now become a sort of standard test in companies when they want to expand the mind of people, that they can persuade them that if they show them how to walk and what to think about at that moment. Other people have done that. Literally hundreds of people have done it now. In my early days, it was only certain people, it was believed that only certain people could do that. But, I mean, walking on hot coals has been proved to be possible for the average person with positive thinking. Whereas the other things that you say I've done obviously are much more involved and haven't been done by any other magician.
So are you saying in a sense it was something that was not as mainstream before and has become more mainstream?
Well, it's surprising that at a certain time in the 50s and 60s, that the people who were mind trainers and people who were motivators realized that you could get anyone to do that sort of thing if you give them the right mental attitude. One of the things that I used to lecture on is that positive thinking and achievement. And, you know, there might be a young boy who would like to climb Mount Everest, and it seems totally out of reach. And of course it is, because he has no idea what's involved. But if you get a young person to start walking and hiking and climbing small hills and eventually becoming a mountaineer on a small scale, as he improves and as he understands the equipment he has to use, and as he understands that he has lack of oxygen when he gets high up, once he's got all that knowledge and gets the right equipment, then virtually anybody can do anything. And that's just an example that, you know, people say, well, I could never do that. And once you have that attitude, you won't be able to do it. But if you believe in yourself and do it step by step, most people can do anything.
That's quite an inspiring message, not just in terms of those who want to go into magic, but in terms of a life lesson as a whole. If you take it step by step, then anything is essentially achievable.
Well, the most important thing that I said was not too much step by step. That, of course, is logic. But the mental attitude, most people are at a certain level in life and think to themselves, that's where I am, I can't get any further. Totally wrong. It's the attitude that makes you go to any height you want. And this sounds ridiculous when I say it now, but when I was young, I thought if I wanted to become Prime Minister, I could. Obviously, that wasn't the route I was taking, but the attitude I've had, and I've been able to inspire other people to have the same attitude, is that you can achieve absolutely anything as long as you have the desire and the motivation to want to do that. So anybody could become a magician, a juggler, a dancer, a pianist, you name it. It's just a question of dedication and perseverance.
That positive attitude, that call for perseverance and unyielding aspiration, and a lot of people my age have that. They feel that they're invincible, they can go as far as possible. Sometimes it comes to a point in a moment of crises where everything stops, every aspiration is interfered. For instance, now, in this coronavirus climate, COVID-19, where everything that we thought was normal has just been cut immediately. Everything's postponed. How do people who have those dreams, aspirations, how can they get through this very tricky, very difficult period? And also, people like yourself, in a higher age bracket, if you don't mind me saying, how are people like yourself trying to deal with this moment of isolation?
You know, it's easy for me to say because I don't mind revealing my age. I'm going to be 94 in a few months. It's the same attitude we had during the war, during the Blitz. You know, London was being bombed and many people that I knew were killed in the bombing. We lived in 2 or 3 different houses which were bombed next door, and my wife's parents' house was bombed. She came home one day from school and the house wasn't there anymore. And the attitude that people had, those people who were positive, realized that you can't live like that. You can't go in a shelter and stay in a shelter, an air raid shelter all the time. So if you're a fatalist, you say, well, either a bomb's going to hit me or not. And having that attitude now with this virus is the same. Most people are afraid of getting the virus, and that is the most debilitating part of it. If people have this positive attitude that, well, if I'm careful and I don't mix with people and I don't do the things I shouldn't do, and once I've touched doorknobs or rails somewhere, I wash my hands, all these simple things, the percentage of the death rate will come down rapidly. But unfortunately, most people are a little bit stubborn and say, well, it's not going to happen to me, and they're still mixing with people. I think slowly the government is winning on that basis, that they're trying to persuade people to be sensible, that, one person affects two affect 4, 8, 16, so very rapidly. So if they can persuade the public to realize that if they're sensible and considerate to other people, that the death rate and the people who get it will go down rapidly. And secondly, most people that get virus only have an unpleasant experience for a couple of weeks, as if they had a cold, and they get over it. So it's these incredible headlines that we see of the huge death rates in different countries that make people afraid. And if you keep a positive attitude, life is difficult at the moment, but it will continue, and I'm sure we get out of this within a few months.
Positivity and rationality and some of that blitz spirit. I hope people do
Absolutely.
take that message. It's interesting as well that you bring up the government messaging, because so much of what's made the UK unique in how it's tackled this crisis is, instead of just throwing themselves into lockdowns, which happened eventually, but initially they were adopting these sorts of measures in regard to behavioural science. Whenever Boris Johnson stood up and did those daily addresses, to the left of him was not just doctors, but a behavioural scientist that was trying to understand the psychology of the British people. Do you find that bizarre or brilliant that the British government employed those tactics more than any other country?
No, I think, first of all, when you say other countries, we're talking about the countries that have been affected most, like Spain and Italy and China. And I have to say that, having been an entertainer and working in many, many countries around the world, people do have different attitudes and different mentalities. And I think what the British government's done is suits our mentality. Some people take a little while to persuade, but it is beginning to work. And even from the people I know, their attitudes have changed in the last 2 weeks. It's a big subject, but the mentality towards it and the positive thinking that it's not going to happen to you or your family or your friends is very important.
How do you reassure people? Because I'm sure so much of your job was about taking someone on stage perhaps who's extremely nervous, doesn't quite know what's going to happen next, and you need to essentially hold their hand and say, it's going to be okay.
You're absolutely right. And that is a question of experience and personality. And within a few minutes of me starting my show, people feel reassured and know that I'm not going to, let's say, if I ask them to sit down, pull the chair away or something like that. That's not my character. And so I've always had this question from other artists. When they ask for people to volunteer, it takes a long time to come up. When I ask for volunteers, they seem to come up very quickly. Well, one of the secrets was that I would plant the idea early in my show. I would say, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask some of you to volunteer. don't worry, nothing untoward will happen, and so on. I didn't say those words, but it was reassuring. And then I did something of interest. They got confidence in me, and when I then asked, now is the time for you to come up, I had a rush of people. I had to turn them away. So it's a question of personality. Once somebody's volunteered, it's the duty of the entertainer to make them feel comfortable and not ill at ease, and also make sure that when they go off the stage, you help them down the steps or get someone else to do that. But it's the way you treat people, and that, of course, translates into life. You know, if you're a considerate person and ooze this confidence that other people can feel that you're not the sort of person who's going to, so to speak, pull the rug under them, they'll trust you. I mean, I don't set out to tell people to trust me; they do it automatically. But there is a downside to that, because once I've started my show, people expect me to do the most incredible things. And you know, for instance, if you were to have a table full of stuff and covered it with a cloth and say, I'm going to make this disappear, and then you pull the cloth away and it hasn't disappeared, everything is still there, the audience will talk about that for the rest of their lives. I was there the night it didn't work. So, but when you do pull the cloth away and it's disappeared, they don't talk about it. They just say, oh, that was good. What's the next trick? So it's the role of the magician is to make it all entertaining and unexpected, because after all, when you call in a plumber, you're not surprised that he can do the plumbing, or an electrician, or a musician being able to play an instrument. So if you're billed as a magician, and people expect to do these unusual things, otherwise you wouldn't be a magician.
I think that's if you're listening, if someone listening to this does want to try and get into magic, these are certainly a number of themes that I'm hoping they do heed. And actually, now's an incredible time for someone to try to get into magic, especially if they're stuck at home with nothing to do. Could it potentially be a brilliant source of escapism for people who want to try to learn a new skill in the next couple of weeks?
Well, obviously, I don't know about the next couple of weeks, but obviously,
yeah.
I've
given a longer time scale, perhaps, yes.
I've been explaining this for many years, that magic is a fantastic hobby, because it makes you interested in all kinds of things that you wouldn't have looked at before. When you perform, it gives you confidence. It makes eye contact, makes people smile. You know, a magician can go up to a group of people who are miserably standing around a bar or in a restaurant and just making small talk. And if he's got the right personality, he comes over, does a little trick, and people look up at him, make eye contact, smile, interact, start talking to him, start talking to each other. When he's gone, they say, how did you do that? And I'm sure he never let go of that, or whatever the patter is. But magic is a fantastic hobby. It gives you confidence. It makes you interact with people. And I've seen a lot of people who wouldn't have gone very far in life, who do it purely for hobby, and it's brought them out of themselves, and it makes a big difference. So, of course, this is a good time. In fact, some of our magical friends have already done that. I don't know whether you can find it on YouTube, or they have their own channels where they're offering to teach people simple tricks just to keep them occupied.
So the internet can be a wonderful source in that sense. I mean, also it has its downsides. People use forums to give away tricks and ruin it for others. But there is a positive, which is that if you are sitting at home with unlimited internet, it could be your chance to dive into that world.
Very much so. In fact, many of the people that explain tricks have made it up themselves. They're mostly wrong. They're mostly too complicated methods, or methods that aren't really practical. So we don't take that too seriously. Of course, sometimes they get it right, but that hasn't affected magic. You know, you can have a trick explained, and if a good magician shows you the same trick the following week, you still wouldn't know how it was done because of the presentation. Presentation and personality is everything. The trick and the method is not so important. It's the entertainment value and surprise value, and what you're doing is you're going against science. You know, if it were possible to hold an object up and let go and it stays there, then there wouldn't be a magician being able to do a levitation of some kind, because it would be normal. So when a magician puts an object in the air and lets go, that becomes magic. He goes against the principles, you know, penetrating solids, making something disappear from one side and reappearing on another side. All these things that we do in magic are the opposite of what science says is possible. And once you do that and see that people are entertained and cheered up by it and smiling and interactive, it's a great hobby. So I couldn't recommend it more. In fact, I had to give a little plug to my son Marvin of Marvin's Magic, because he has inspired literally millions of people with his Marvin's Magic set of tricks and boxes and things like that. And his aim was to make it simple for the average man or woman to learn the trick and then be able to do that. And many of those have become full-time professionals and are now highly respected in the magic world.
Yes, I think what Marvin's been able to do is make magic accessible to amateurs. And what's brilliant about that is that, I think it was you who said this actually a few years ago, magic's the only art form in which an amateur can go into a professional dressing room and tell him where he went wrong. Yes. That's what makes magic so special.
I did say that. Where did you read that?
Where did I see that? Oh, somewhere on the wonderful wide web, where you are featured so much. But it was a quote that stood out to me. I thought that was brilliant, because it doesn't work in any other industry, really. You have the professionals and you have the amateurs. Whilst here, it seems those hierarchies don't seem to exist in the same way.
Absolutely. It's probably the only art form where that happens. Talking about art form, when I was president of the Magic Circle for 10 years, and we were looking for permanent premises, and we eventually found a building, and it needed a huge amount of money to refurbish it. And I had to persuade the Arts Council that we were an art form. And it took a couple of years, but they accepted it in the end, because before that, we're thinking of ballet and paintings and music and so on as an art form. But we've now established that magic is an art form as well.
And when you try to perform, what is it that you focus on most? Because you've used a few words in the last 10 minutes, the entertainment factor, the shock factor. Is that what you're focusing on particularly? Rather than the craft, you're focusing on trying to get a reaction from those that you're performing to?
Well, the big word is entertainment. First of all, the audience doesn't know you, so you've got to establish yourself. They've got to like what they see, or be amused by it, or mystified, but you've got to establish yourself with the audience. And once they think you're that type of person, then anything you do after that is much easier. I've called myself man of mystery for maybe 70 years now. I didn't call that myself. That was the billing method that appeared on the posters and the advertising. And in fact, just recently, I found out literally 2 weeks ago that the title International Man of Mystery, which has been my title for all those years, was taken over by the film Austin Powers. And if you look up in Google International Man of Mystery, you get a few pages of Austin Powers first. That's an actor called Mike Myers. And I used to be a bit frustrated by that, but I hadn't registered it, so there's nothing I could do about it. And just 2 weeks ago, my son Marvin got a letter from the man who was behind that suggestion that they should use that title, and he got that title from seeing one of my leaflets and advertising in the theatrical newspaper called The Stage, and he's written to us absolutely confirming that, because I used that title at least 30 years before the films were made. So it was quite a relief to hear that my original title still stands.
Oh, that's tremendous. And I think it's well deserved, given your esteemed career, which I actually wanted to touch on briefly as well. The international man of mystery. You must have had so many incredible achievements and honors over the many decades that you worked in magic. You must have been asked this question 100 times as well, but I'm interested to know, what's the highlight?
Well, I'm extremely honored and proud of the honors I've been awarded by different countries and different magical organizations. I think one of my highlights is probably that we have 3 different degrees in the Magic Circle: member of the Magic Circle, a member of the associate of the Inner Magic Circle, and a full member of the Inner Magic Circle. And if you're a performer, you get a gold star with it. And there's just one more award, which is the gold medal, and only 2 people hold that gold medal, and I'm one of them. So I think I'm very proud of that, but that's rather internal for the Magic Circle, but that's the proudest one. And then I've had some really nice awards from the American Association of Magicians, who are based in Hollywood at a place called the Magic Castle, and they've given me a Master's Fellowship and various other things, and I've had numerous awards like that in Italy and Sweden and Holland and so on. But, and last year I received an MBE, which in the Queen's Honours for magic, and that's the first and only time that somebody's received an honour for magic. I was actually what they added was for magic and psychology.
I think it says all about how it is largely down to psychology, as you drew on just at the very beginning, actually. Then there's a couple of other moments of, I think, inspiration that maybe some female aspiring magicians might take note to, which was that you helped get the first woman into the Magic Circle. And I think that shows how much of a trailblazer you were in many ways. Trailblazing in terms of helping women in the industry, trailblazing in terms of the special effects in Hollywood during the 70s and 80s. You set the bar very high, I think, for many other magicians to follow.
Well, it's my enthusiasm for the art. I think that's what did that. But yes, as far as ladies were concerned, for many years the Magic Circle only had male members, and we needed a certain amount of votes to get that through, and we kept failing year after year. And when we eventually got it through, that was my when I was president at the time. About a year later, when we had a few lady members, and now we have quite a few, and they're very good, I asked the members, what was the reason so many of you voted against, and not one of them could remember.
Before we round off, I wanted to just give my own personal testimony, because I think 11 years ago now, it was 2009, I was sitting as an audience member in Derren Brown's Enigma show. And in the brochure that I bought and that I read just after the show, he described you as one of our greatest living magical performers. That must make your heart tingle when you see compliments like that from people who, like Derren Brown, are the best of the best in this current era.
Well, absolutely. I'm pleased to say that he's used some of my ideas in literally every show, every stage show that he's presented for the last nearly 20 years now, and his television shows, and he openly acknowledges it which I very much appreciate. Unfortunately, he was supposed to start another tour next week, but of course it's all been cancelled now.
Indeed.
But we're hoping that it will appear later on. But certainly accolades from people like Derren Brown and Dynamo and Copperfield and David Berglas and so on. Of course, it's very pleasing that my ideas are used by people who know what they're talking about. So that's not only flattering, but it's very satisfying that my ideas seem to fit in with the kind of presentation they do.
There'll be big names like Derren Brown who are inspired by you, and just ordinary folk listening to this who one day might want to be standing in the shoes of yourself or Derren Brown. Now, I know that you're careful to say that magicians shouldn't try to emulate the image of someone. They should try and be their own type of magician. And so what is the main piece of advice that you would give to ensure that people do that?
Well, it's something I've said for many hundreds of young magicians, in fact, all ages of magicians, when they ask the same question. I said, stand in front of a mirror and look at yourself. And once you see who you are and what you look like and what you sound like, become that person, and then you can't go wrong. But if you stand in front of the mirror and you see yourself and then go on stage and try and be a David Copperfield or a Derren Brown, it doesn't work. People who want to be funny trying to be Tommy Cooper, and it's only Tommy Cooper who looked like the way he looked and the way he sounded. He got a laugh before he even opened his mouth. And if people try and copy these things, it doesn't work. But it doesn't matter what shape you are, what size you are, what age you are. If people like what they see and think you're being natural, then you can, it's a winning formula to try and emulate other people and copy them, either with the routines or the mannerisms or the catchphrases, have never worked. So be yourself. That's the main thing.
Here's hoping that people are able to listen to that and forge their own path. I want to thank you for your time, International Man of Mystery, and also I hope that you stay healthy and stay well over the next couple of weeks and months during this trying period.
So that was Benji Hire sitting down with David Berglas this week, and an inspiring man he absolutely was. We sat down with him for about 50 minutes. He took us through his incredible journey. Benji, I'd like to know from yourself, what did you take away from that interview with David?
Well, I was blown away by his astounding positivity. I mean, put aside his achievements, put aside what he's done in terms of the industry. I think just as a human being in a difficult situation, stuck at home by himself, and he's actually giving off messages of hope and positivity and optimism. At the same time, trying to convey a message of responsibility and rationale about how we should act going forward amid this coronavirus crisis. And I think for someone who, and he won't mind me saying this, is of someone of a senior age, to still have that profound sanity of mind was quite amazing to listen to and to see. We sit down and we talk about how we should act during coronavirus and how we should deal with isolation. And most of the conversations we have amongst our friends can be quite painful and mundane. But actually from him, you really got this profound and sane approach, which hopefully we can all take something from.
I tell you what I found quite interesting, Benji. He was telling us the story about his time during World War II. And at the age of 16, him wanting to become a Spitfire pilot and trying to lie about his age to join the RAF. To join the RAF. And that was his way of trying to play his part during the war. And the lesson I took from that personally, and I hope our listeners as well would take this lesson, is playing your bit during this time. David tried to play his bit at such a young age during World War II, and look at him now today, the impact that had made on him. I think that it is so important. What he was trying to say was playing your bit and doing your part to help and aid others. I don't know if you took that same message as well.
Absolutely. It comes down to the fact that he went above and beyond what he needed to do in the war because he wanted to make that difference. Now, all we have to do to make a difference is sit at home. And so I think that people should try to heed that. But at the same time, it's not just making sure that you sit at home and do nothing. His whole point was that magic can be that escapism, because it really is. It really is the only art form in which anybody can go and learn from nothing and create something new and different. You don't have that in, say, sport or music. There's the people at the top and there's the people who are beginners and amateurs. With magic, you can create something truly original and bring that into the industry and surprise even the very best.
And when he got started with magic, it was almost this all-encompassing, all-absorbing hobby that he dedicated himself to for about 5 years, I think he said.
Yeah, it takes
day
commitment,
in,
doesn't it?
Day out. And I think this time, at least for me, Benji, it presents an opportunity for me to create a schedule, create a brand new schedule whilst I'm stuck here at home like everybody else, and to use this as an opportunity to seek the opportunities that could potentially be formed as a result of this, and to dedicate the spare time that I maybe have at home to, whether it be a new hobby or a new business or a new venture, dedicating that time like David did when he was encompassing himself in the magic world. So I completely agree with you there around this idea of it being a source of escapism, but not only that, him creating a schedule and routine to pick up a hobby or a skill.
There's a chance here. There's a window. There's an opportunity. You're absolutely right, that we should try to take full advantage from, rather than just sitting here frustrated at the current state of being, and maybe offer us an opportunity also to learn more about the human condition, something that obviously he mastered in quite an emphatic way. I mean, during that interview, he was telling me things that seemed obvious, but when you think about it, it kind of blew your mind, how everyone would make the same choice, how humans have this innate psychology. I mean, I always think to myself, there's so many bits that I'd love to learn if only I had more time. Well, now we have the time. Now let's try to delve into stuff that have always puzzled us over the last couple of years.
And I've got a great book for you to start with, Benji, and that is Derren Brown's book called Happy. So
yes,
Derren Brown's book Happy is inspired by the ancient Greek philosophy Stoicism. And Derren Brown is... his main inspiration is David Berglas, as everyone heard in the interview. And I would genuinely recommend that as a fantastic starting point to help us understand the human condition, to help us understand how we can cope with adversity, especially in times like now. And if anyone is interested in understanding how they can potentially take some of the lessons that David spoke about, I think Derren Brown's Happy is a really great place to start. And Derren Brown being inspired by David just goes to show some of the inspiration that David took there.
For all of you listening, we're grateful for tuning in to Their Lives, this new and special podcast, shining a light on the experiences of those who have had some incredible journeys over the last couple of decades, including, of course, David. But he is just the first. We hope that there's many more episodes of this podcast to come in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Subscribe, share this widely. And if you know of anybody who might want their lives shared on this podcast, well, contact us through Twitter. It's very easy to find both Benji Hire and Benji Fisher. We hope to bring you more of this in the future. In the meantime, of course, stay well and stay safe.